We're going to be recording these webinars, so just wanted to let you know that. And they will be available for future viewing by those that can't attend. So Sarah has started the recording and that will be available after the meeting. The second thing is we will be doing a mute all. We still want to hear from you when we get to the question and answer. So if you would like to ask a question, you will probably need to unmute yourself by clicking on the microphone at that time. There is also a chat area if you want to get someone's attention or put a question in there during the meeting. These webinars are intended to provide you with some learning opportunities to support you in your water planning. We are going to hold 3 webinars this spring and early summer, and the next one will be on May 8th. If you have ideas for webinars you'd like to hear, what topics you'd like to have, please let one of us know. Just shoot us an email or drop something in the chat. We're interested to hear what you'd like to hear about. Okay, so today we're going to talk about Hurricane Helene and response in the water sector. And council members' perspective, just wanted to sort of frame this up for you. This is something you can carry back to your council for discussion with your council members after we've had these discussions today. And some things to think about. Does your current regional water plan address emergency response to storms? Some of the councils I've worked with, I don't think their plans do, and so this might be a new topic to think about in the future. Would you like to have this added to an agenda for a future council meeting for your council? And if you do, is there other information, other questions you'd like to see answered when we bring that back to your council for discussion? That's all I wanted to set up, and would like to get right into the speakers. Before I do, I will pause and see if there's any questions from the council members. And remember, you're on mute. You'll need to unmute. All right, very good. I am going to stop sharing so that Bill Murphy, our first speaker, can load his slides. And while he does that, I'll introduce him. Bill Murphy is the state climatologist. He has a bachelor's degree in applied physics and a master's and PhD in earth and atmospheric sciences from Georgia Institute of Technology. He's worked for 8 years he did work for 8 years as a meteorologist for the Atmospheric Sciences Research Center at State University of New York at Albany. And he also was the U.S. Station Science Leader at McMurdo Station Antarctica in 1983. In September 2011, he was appointed as the state climatologist by Governor Nathan Deal. And Bill is currently the state climatologist for Georgia, and he's worked for the Environmental Protection Division in the Georgia Department of Natural Resources for 20 years. In conjunction with Georgia Tech, Bill's group provides air quality forecasts for metropolitan Atlanta, Macon, and Columbus. And he has also been an adjunct college professor since August 2010 at Georgia Perimeter College, Georgia State University, and the University of West Georgia. So we're glad to have Bill with us today. Thank you, Bill. Bill's going to give us an overview of Hurricane Helene. And then we'll have a second speaker from EPD who will talk about response to the storm. Go ahead, Bill. Oh, and okay. The one thing I would just want to mention is we're going to hold questions to the end after both speakers. Sorry, go ahead, Bill.
Sounds good. Can everybody see and hear this okay?
Sounds good.
Okay, good deal. Thank you, Kristen. Basically, I'm just going to give a brief overview of Hurricane Helene. It was quite a storm. Could perhaps be Georgia's most significant natural disaster of last year. So, getting on into it, I just kind of talking about the overall season that we had last year, tropical season. We had 18 named storms. That was tied for 5th most in a year. 11 hurricanes, 5 of those were major. We had 5 landfalling hurricanes, the 4th highest on record. And those were Beryl, Debbie, Francine, Helene, and Milton. You might remember most of those. Helene was actually the 8th Cat 4 and 5 storm to make landfall since 2017. And this just kind of shows all the tropical cyclones that we had last season from the National Hurricane Center. To the right here, you can see that actually is Hurricane Helene, and you can see it was a very large system, large hurricane, expanded, pretty much up the Atlantic seaboard. Okay. So rapid intensification of tropical systems is more common these days. Really, over the past decade and a half or so, tropical systems have dramatically grown stronger, quicker. Helene was one of them, and this makes forecasting more challenging and causes difficulties with evacuation, of course. A lot of this is due to less cooling of the surface and subsea surface temps during the winter time. Ocean temps just don't cool off quite as much. And so basically the rapid intensification occurs because you have more warm ocean seawater there that provides fuel for these systems. And we have had also more recently, we're getting more marine heat wave events thanks to the strong Bermuda High and also the Gulf Ridge. In 2024 season, 7 hurricanes underwent rapid intensification. Helene was one of them, like I said. Also, we had Beryl, Isaac, Kirk, Milton, Oscar, and Raphael. Helene actually went from a Cat 1 to a Cat 4 in 19 hours, so very rapidly intensified. This is Helene right here on the right, tropical satellite image just before it started intensifying, getting its act together. And these systems, with additional warming of the sea surface temperatures, we have more water vapor, which leads to more water-loaded systems, kind of turbocharges these hurricanes. I call it. Systems are more water loaded. A couple other tidbits I was going to mention too. Beryl actually was the earliest Cat 5 Atlantic Basin hurricane on record. Remember, Beryl came very early in the season. Also, Milton, that turned out to be a Category 3 when it made landfall on October 9th. But significant about Milton, it had 46 tornadoes with it. And Milton also was actually among the highest ever rapid intensification on record, had a 90-mile-per-hour wind speed increase in 24 hours, so even more rapidly intensified than Helene did. And then just putting Helene into perspective, before it made landfall, remember last summer we had gone through, it was almost like a feast or famine summer, I call it, where we had a very, very dry June, followed by a real wet July, very dry August, and then Helene came in September, very wet conditions, and October turned out to be very dry too, following Helene, actually all the way to mid-November. And these are the major climate stations here. I just wanted to show, I'll pick out Macon, for example. You can see the driest June on record, 7th wettest July, driest August on record, 5th wettest September. Again, that was Helene impacts. And then October actually was the #1 driest month ever on record for Macon, 0.0 inches of rain for the month of October. And again, typically fall months are our driest months of the year, of the season, but following Helene, the dryness really, exacerbated things in that area. And a couple of things for Atlanta. You can see Atlanta was the #1 driest October on record as well, for example. And then Helene turned out to be the 2nd wettest September on record. So moving on, I'll talk a little bit. I can talk a long time about this if anybody ever wants me to, but I'm sure y'all want to hear it all. But the meteorological setup was interesting, real interesting and unique for Helene because basically we had a cutoff low that formed just to the west of the Mississippi Valley here, and a term called potential vorticity, maximum positive potential vorticity, kind of intensified this low pressure system. So Helene's down here in the Gulf, and you can see around this cutoff low that we had back to the west, we also had a strong jet, low-level jet, 850 millibars, lower levels of the atmosphere that just channel Gulf moisture just ahead of Helene. So along with Helene being down here in the Gulf, we also had these conditions set up just ahead of Helene. I call it a predecessor event. And this predecessor event really brought widespread 5 to 10 inches 1 to 2 days prior to the onset of Helene's rainfall. So we basically already had flash flooding occurring before rainfall, 24 to 36 hours ahead of the event, which saturated soils and really exacerbating the flooding when Helene eventually did make landfall. Additional rainfall, tropical storm force, hurricane force winds also, of course, occurred with Helene. Another part of the setup, I should have mentioned, we had a strong high pressure ridge off the Atlantic seaboard. So this whole pattern wasn't budging. That's actually the Bermuda high in place. So basically, it just channeled this low level moisture, stream of Gulf moisture up ahead of Helene. And then one of the big players that made this dump, copious amounts of rainfall, especially catastrophic amounts, I should say, over the Carolinas, was this cutoff low that just sat there. So basically the system, once it made landfall, got involved in the cutoff low. And I'm going to show you a satellite loop of how that all occurred. Basically, hopefully this will work. It's kind of interesting. But you can see this is a water vapor imagery from GOES 16. You can see here comes the predecessor event with that heavy rain just ahead of Helene. Helene's still down here in the Gulf. Here comes Helene making landfall, then moving up, eastern Georgia up to the Carolinas. There's that cutoff low, that upper low I was telling you about back to the west where you had that enhanced potential vorticity. Another player that I should have mentioned in this, and again, it gets complicated because there were a lot of meteorological factors here. I'll let it loop again while I'm talking. We had a lot of orographic lifting in advance of the system. So a lot of that moisture that was being funneled up the Appalachians actually intensified, exacerbated the rainfall amounts, more convective rainfall amounts, more training of cells across the same area. And again, they were just training straight across, along the heavy axis of rainfall. And this cutoff low here was really the big culprit, the big player in that kept Helene into the picture for a long time, especially when you consider the Carolinas, Asheville area up in that area. And I'm going to talk about that a little bit more here in just a minute. Okay, speaking of the rainfall amounts, so Helene did come in, made landfall as a Cat 4, the Big Bend region of Florida, east of Tallahassee area. Widespread damage primarily impacted Florida, Georgia, South and North Carolina, Tennessee, and Virginia. Helene was the costliest event in the U.S. 2024, estimated $78.7 billion. Here's a shot of Helene right here again, prior to landfall, 26th of September. And the amount of rain was just unbelievable in Helene's impact. How unlikely were the highest 3-day totals associated with Helene? Some of these amounts up here in Asheville, North Carolina, they had 26 to 30-inch amounts, pretty much a 1 in 500 to 1 in 1,000 year occurrence. Atlanta, I'm going to talk about a 48-hour rainfall event we had here in Atlanta, 1 to 200, 1 to 500 year event. So really heavy amounts of rain that occurred because of Helene. Flash flooding was really rampant across the area. Atlanta we posted about this, received its 48-hour rainfall maximum on record for 2 days, had 11.12 inches. This is a picture of some of the flooding, extreme rainfall we had in the Buckhead area. Had over 200 homes that were flooded in Atlanta, homes and businesses where water moved in to the area from freshwater flooding. This is a 30-day percent of normal preset map, and it just shows the footprint of Helene that occurred. This is percent of normal. Those are 200 to 300% of normal in the blue and the purple here. You can see where the heavier swath of precip moved up the state. And again, this goes back from September 22nd to October 21st. So 30-day percent of normal looking back from October 21st. Still quite visible on Helene there. Okay. And then looking at some of the wind speed and damage, that was the big impact from Helene as far as really hitting Georgia hard, and part of the Carolinas as well. But you can see this is just a map showing peak wind speed measurements from all the Weather Service stations, co-op, ASOS measurements, and other like the UGA, Mesonet, other locations that had wind speed coming along the path. And you can see this big area down here in South Georgia had 190-mile-per-hour winds, 80 to 90 knot gust, peak gust in those areas. So places like Coffee County had 80 to 85% of all the homes in the entire county damaged. several counties were out of power completely for extended periods of time, you know, long time without any power in a lot of these counties. And we had, as it moved up toward the Statesboro, Candler County area, the same type of thing. Counties, you know, really without power. Georgia Power actually replaced 11,000 power poles in Helene's aftermath, which is pretty incredible. The previous record was 1,700. Probably that was Michael, I'm thinking, Hurricane Michael, that occurred in 2018. So some of the other impacts, I'm not going to go all of them, but just really tremendous agricultural damage, agricultural impacts from Helene. We had farmers lost a lot of livestock infrastructure, a third cotton crop, 200 chicken houses, hundreds of thousands of pecan and pine trees were lost. Pretty much that's that peak wind speed damage. Remember, the center came on shore here. So just east of the center is where you had the big impacts of the winds. That's that, call that right front quadrant of a hurricane. So pretty much Valdosta, Savannah, especially Augusta, and then on up toward northeast Georgia, had really, really strong winds, and, you know, still recovering from that too right now. Peaches and blueberries were damaged, had 6.9 billion agricultural damage, 1.28 billion in timber losses, big time forest impacts, 8.9 million acres of forest land. One thing I did want to mention, we just started getting into D2, which is severe drought too in the state. And a lot of that is due to the debris. Some of the wildfire activity that's occurring now is due to all the debris that fell from Helene. So really up in east central, northeast Georgia, getting a lot of fire, you know, old refuge, old debris that's still intact. So all these dry fuels and low relative humidities really adds to exacerbate the fire hazard. And we are, like I said, we are in some severe drought as of this week on the U.S. Drought Monitor, especially around the Augusta area. So wrapping it, getting close to wrapping it. Hurricane Helene, some of the 5-day total rainfall amounts. This just shows how much it was. Really extreme rainfall up here in the Asheville, North Carolina area. Had a 30.78 inch. The maximum for Georgia was a 14.7. I believe that was up in Raven County too for a storm total amount. But yeah, that just shows how significant. A lot of high 20s to 30 amounts up here in the Carolinas, so up in the Asheville area. And then just kind of wrapping it up, some of the impacts that occurred around the Asheville, North Carolina area I wanted to show. This is actually a picture of the Biltmore, believe it or not, in the background. It just shows how it just destroyed a lot of the area around it was due to mudslides and debris flows. You know, deadliest hurricane since Maria, deadliest to strike the U.S. mainland since Katrina, 2005. We had at least 219 fatalities. For Georgia, for Atlanta, I believe we had 38 fatalities total. And again, impacts, flash flooding, mud, landslides, roads, bridges washed away. This is just kind of a eye-boggling picture here that shows from the same location some of the flooding that occurred looking out from I-40 on US 74. That's what it should look like. And there's the flooding that occurred. That's just one typical picture, but a lot of them were there from the massive flooding events. And it's pretty much all I had. So I'll stop sharing. I think you said hold off the questions till later. Is that right, Kristen?
Yeah. So
okay.
Next, and then we can do some questions. Yeah. Thank you.
Sure.
Next up, we have Sean Early from EPD. He's going to talk to us about emergency response in the water sector. Sean is the drinking water compliance unit manager for Georgia EPD, where he's tasked with managing implementation, compliance, and enforcement of state and federal drinking water rules and regulations. He is also the acting emergency response coordinator and ESF3 lead. I think it's going to tell us what that means for the Watershed Protection Branch. Sean received his bachelor's and master's degree in biology from Valdosta State University, and he's been with Georgia EPD for 7 years, where he also worked as a RTCR and groundwater rule manager and as a drinking water laboratory certification officer. Sean, thanks for joining us, and we look forward to hearing what you did after Hurricane Helene, or during Hurricane Helene. Thanks.
Wonderful, thank you. Yeah, and apparently I missed updating the bio. I've been with EPD for 9 years now, and like she said, my blue sky days I manage the drinking water compliance unit, but when we have these emergencies, I'm the emergency response coordinator, and we'll talk exactly what the ESF3 lead is here coming up. So today we're going to talk a little bit about Hurricane Helene, but I also want to go into, emergency response in the water sector, what's available, and how that generally works in our time allotted. We can't dive fully all the way in. Nope, it's not going. But in general, emergency response is run by GEMA. GEMA should sound pretty familiar to everybody, very close to FEMA. That's what it is. It's the state version of that. We say GEMA, but it is now actually the Georgia Emergency Management and Homeland Security Agency, although internally, externally, everybody still refers to it as GEMA. And their task with really implementing a statewide management system, the response and facilitating any kind of response to an emergency here in the state. They played a major role in COVID. They play a major role in every hurricane, and we'll talk about it, large events, and really anything you could think of. They're there to support all the state agencies and everybody here in the state. They work off what's called the ESF, or Emergency Support Function structure. So all that means, and it can be confusing when people say I'm ESF 3 or 10 or 7, but they divide up emergency response into different sections. And that way they can activate or not activate certain agencies depending on the response. So it's not a push the red button for everybody, and run to the state operations center. It's only specific functions. So for the Georgia EPD, we fulfill 3 and 10. If there's a hurricane or some kind of emergency that might affect the water sector, they'll activate us. So Hurricane Helene, everybody was activated. But for COVID, which is the longest activation in the state's history, it was mainly 6 mass care, 5 emergency management, and 8 public health. And they were activated for multiple years in a row. So this kind of layout allows them to have certain agency responds while other ones don't. And you don't have too many cooks in the kitchen, per se. So I mentioned the Georgia EPD fulfills 2 of these functions, ESF 3 and 10. And when I started, I said ESF 3 lead and not ESF 10 lead. And that's because within the EPD, although we're tasked with fulfilling these support functions for the state, we actually have 2 separate groups. So our emergency response team fulfills ESF 10, and they are on call, available 24 hours a day, 7 days a week, 365. And they respond to things such as discharges, accident with a tractor trailer that might spill some oil on the roadway, things of those smaller instances of emergencies. They were the ones who responded to the Golden Array, and that emergency response team is out of our district offices, and they fulfill that role. During Helene, they were the ones that were staging the debris centers and things of that. It's labeled hazardous material, but it goes a little bit beyond that. Emergency support function 3, it is labeled public works. It responds to anything drinking water, wastewater, dams, roads and bridges, debris removal, in that aspect, although DOT will work out of a different support function mainly. And that's staffed by the Georgia EPD Watershed Protection Branch. And that is what we do, and that's what we respond to. For ESF 3, we are, and that's why we refer to it as emergency response coordinator, is because we are the coordination part. We do have a services contract. So if anybody here is familiar with Georgia Rural Water Association, we have a services contract with them. So they're the boots on the ground. So the EPD will staff the state operations center, and we will coordinate with Georgia Rural Water, who will be the ones running around, getting to water systems, getting resources set up, and also maintaining any kind of equipment or resources that we do have. We respond to all types of emergencies, natural, man-made threats. There's technological. Cybersecurity is a huge thing nowadays. That is a real threat. And as I said, special events. So Super Bowls, we have a lot of college national championships was here, and a big one next year. What they've already been talking about is the FIFA tournament here. It will be done in Atlanta, and there's a lot of planning that going into that. You might not know it, but they will activate, and we will have people at the State Operations Center just as a precaution to a lot of these big events, whether that's a president visiting or any major sporting event or concert, something of that nature. But the main ones that we respond to, and generally what we're really concerned with, is hurricane season. That's when we have the most activations. That's these tropical systems, hurricanes. We just saw pictures that flooding does impact us a little bit, but really the heart of what emergency response function 3 responds to are results of high winds, high amount of rains that that affect our dams, our water systems, or our wastewater systems. So we'll kind of go through a quick step-by-step with Helene and use it as an example about how we respond to emergencies. So here's Hurricane Helene. We just heard about it from Bill, the magnitude, right, a category 5. I thought it was interesting the days leading up, what we were being told at GMO was, don't worry if it's a 5 or a 4, that doesn't matter at this point. The wind cone was so large that the impact area was going to hit us no matter what and devastate many areas of our state. And that's what the real focus was on the couple days leading up, is how those winds would impact what side of the eye water systems or people were on. That's what they're really focusing on and gearing up towards. And I think we do know, the storm, when I went to bed the night before the storm made landfall, we were expecting it to really come straight up through Macon, hit Atlanta. And when I woke up, the storm actually got pushed further towards the coast, with Valdosta and Augusta taking a huge brunt of the storm. So a big thing here is a lot of you might see during emergencies, there'll be different declarations, or, the governor might release something. There might be a federal, declaration made. But that is really the first step towards these emergencies. So on September 24th, Governor Kemp declared a state of emergency. Generally, when he does that, the map does not look like the entire state, right? Helene was the entire state. Usually this might be more just the Gulf counties or the counties on the Atlantic side. But what this does is it makes resources available. There's money, there's resources that are only available during states of emergency. So the first step before, if we anticipate an emergency happening, the governor will declare a state of emergency and declare what counties are eligible to receive resources and potential funding during the emergencies. For Helene, it was every county here in the state. So I mentioned GIFA, and I keep saying the State Operations Center. The State Operations Center is a central hub, which all the support functions report to, all these state agencies report to. There's civilian, there's military, there's Department of Defense. It's a central secure hub that we operate out of. It is located over towards the zoo at the Georgia National Guard area. It's supposed to be very secure, proof of a lot of things. The irony we learned during Hurricane Helene was it was supposed to be power proof and have enough power to operate on its own for days and days and days. And we actually had a switch blow on the generator, and we lost power for 30 minutes at the State Operations Center during Helene, but they got that quickly fixed. The State Operations Center was activated from September 25th through November 7th, so over a month. Which is a pretty long activation. Now, it was staffed in person from the 26th of September through the 10th. So for about 2 weeks there, we had 3 to 4 people there at a time, with at least one individual from Safe Dams. We were staffing it 24/7. During the hurricane, as it makes landfall, there's really not a ton you could do other than kind of wait while it makes landfall. But once it made landfall, we began calling we have 2,300 drinking water systems listed here, but it's really about 2,400 drinking water systems and wastewater systems to try and get status updates, to see if they needed any help, if we could provide any resources, what we could do to get them back up and running. and make sure people have access to clean drinking water. During it, we received 109 total resource requests from regulated facilities, and we fulfilled 61 of those requests through working with GRWA, GEMA, and some other agencies. And we delivered over 70 generators. During these activations, it includes we have to prioritize some things. We work with the Department of Public Health. They may have senior centers or hospitals located in water systems that go down and lose water, and hospitals really need water to operate. And so we try and prioritize getting those resources there to get those water systems back up and running. And we had 695 boil water advisories. And to really put that into picture, this is the most boil water advisories we've ever had at a time. These are the most resource requests we've ever had at a time, but 2,400 water systems, and we'll look in the next page, about a third of those water systems were impacted, and almost a third of those water systems issued boil water advisories as a result of the storm. So during emergencies, we have access to some resources. Number one resource that we supply is generators to get pumps back up and running, to get water flowing, to keep pressure. That's the number one thing that usually goes out, especially with hurricanes. We're talking about winds. One of the examples, so a lot of water systems have their own generators, especially big water systems that are built on site, but you can't avoid some things such as trees falling on the generators. And then your resiliency didn't really matter there because a tree fell on the generator and it went out of service. But we had 60 plus generators before the storm, which is the most we've ever had. GRWA does a great job trying to prepare for these things and the services that they provide. And they had contacted some other rural waters across the nation, and we had generators from Mississippi, Oklahoma, Texas, and believe it or not, during emergencies, Florida usually has an excess of generators, even though they're also hit. They go through this so much that kind of 2 days or so after the incident, Florida's usually sending us generators. We have bypass pumps if needed, various miscellaneous resources, transfer switches, things that water systems might need to hook up these resources and adapt. We do have a mobile center, which I don't know if we have time to get into, GRWA does, to put up a mobile kind of net of service, cell service, and internet service. One thing that kind of get misconstrued, ESF3, we do not provide bottled water. We'll get some requests for that bottled water. That's something that we cannot provide. I think that's something that GEMA kind of tries to help coordinate with bigger companies to make available to water systems and municipalities first, and they'll drop some off at local EMA locations. But what we will do is if we don't have a resource, we'll try and help to coordinate and make recommendations of anything that might be needed. So kind of the best example of this, if you remember the Atlanta boil water situation that happened last year, it was isolated, but there were requests that the city made to us to help them, and something they requested was an underwater welder. That's not something that we have, but we were able to make some recommendations, and they were able to get somebody from Alabama to come over and do some underwater welding to get their situation taken care of and move forward. So even though we might not have it, GRWA, like I said, they have a wide national network, and they can usually provide at least a recommendation of where to get a resource. On top of all that, GWP really helped us out during Helene. We deployed all of our generators. We needed more generators, and we talked to them, and they sent out emails to their network, and a lot of municipalities responded back positively. They provided the generators that they had, they delivered them, and they helped get things back up and running. I don't have it in here. There's something called Georgia Warren, if you're ever interested, and it's a mutual aid organization. And they are starting to kind of re-get an inventory of resources that water systems would be willing to hand out or help other water systems during emergencies. So I'd really encourage you, if you're interested in a water system that you're part of, if you have extra resources, trailable generators, that you look into Georgia Warren, and it's something that could really help out a lot of systems when they're in need. So during the hurricane, I alluded to these earlier, 892 water systems were impacted in some way, and out of those, 681 had to issue boil water advisories. There were about 192 inoperable lift stations or impacted, and 26 that we know of went down. We don't get notified as much about lift stations, even if we call. And there were, like I said, 61 fulfilled resource requests. Now, the reason that this number kind of differs between total requests and fulfilled requests is because there are some duplication of efforts. And I encourage everyone to know who their local EMA person is. I'll have my information on here. And if you're part of a water or wastewater system that needs resources during emergencies, you could call me, send an email to the ESF3 email, or you could go through your local EMA. We had a lot of local EMAs duplicating requests every day. We had also like some pleasant surprises is we ran out of generators, and other ESFs and other organizations filled those requests instead of us. So those requests were moved over to them. So that's why those numbers might not match up. A normal response, there might be 15 to 20 fulfilled resource requests. So this was about 3 times the kind of normal. And I think Hurricane Michael might have had 26, and we're sitting here at 61 for Hurricane Helene. And the other process through this is once a emergency situation is over, you'll have a declaration of disaster, and they will identify counties and kind of any assistance that's available. So this is actually still going on. These are the counties that were labeled for eligible for assistance after Hurricane Helene. We track everything. That's one of the main things about putting a resource request through us. We track everything, so you'll be able to have a record for any reimbursement that you might need through GMA or GFA. And I think unless you're involved in emergency response in some capacity at a water system level, a county level, state level, there's a lot of things that you don't know. But during emergencies, literally mostly every process is worked off of an IOU, is what it is. You're looking for assistance and resources, those are provided, and then those resources have to be paid for. And this is the process afterward through declaration of emergency, through GMA and FEMA, that you have to go through to get those reimbursements so that people can be paid for their resources. There were a lot of interesting lessons learned, I'll say, through Helene. The biggest thing that impacted us was the loss of cell service and ability to directly contact systems. We probably didn't hear from 2/3 of the systems in the state until 3 days after the hurricane. The impacted area was so wide that there was absolutely no cell service. There was no, internet. There was no way for people to be contacted. We kind of saw this during Hurricane Michael. And as a result of Hurricane Michael, we recommended people get satellite phones so that they can call their local EMAs or find a way out of the dead area to be able to request those resources. But that might be limited due to debris on the ground. This was such a big area of impact that it took a while for power to be restored and things of those nature. So that's really the number one thing, is our ability to know who needs the resources and get it to them. A lot of the times GRWA would drive into the affected area, deliver resources, and then have to drive out to report back to us and know who to send resources to next. So it was definitely the biggest hurdle in responding to Hurricane Helene. The other thing was long on-site times, because it took days and in some situation weeks for power to be restored. Our resources were sitting on site for multiple days. Usually we get a generator somewhere. It takes about a day to get them back up and operational, and then we can now redeploy that generator. But instead, we took all 60 generators to water systems, and they sat there for 2, 3, 4 days. So we weren't able to redeploy those generators. There's actually a situation, we had a small system. We were able to give them a generator for their well pump, but we couldn't give them a generator for their lift station. So they'd go over there, they'd use it for their pump for a couple of hours, and then when their lift stations needed to be run and they were kind of at the limit of having a spill, they would unhook their generator, run it over their lift station, pump as long as they can before having to take the generator back to their well. So those long on-site times really impacted how we were able to disperse these resources. And even though we had more resources than we'd ever had before, we were very limited on what we were able to do. The duplicate resources from local EMAs was tough, trying to figure out what's been deployed, what hadn't been deployed. When you or local EMA request resources, it's important to be as detailed as possible so we know exactly what is needed. We are getting a lot of duplicate resources for emergency management agencies that were just saying, I need three generators in, Screven County. Okay, what are those in addition to the one you put in yesterday, or are those the same ones for yesterday? What's the deal going on there? So we spent a lot of time having to call people and work these things out. And it's a high stress environment for people that just got hit by a hurricane. They're screaming for help, and it's not easy for us to continually call them and interrupt what they're doing to figure out what they need. So the more detailed information you could have right off the bat will go a long way. Several systems had their own generators, but those generators didn't operate because although they spent all this money on generators, they've sat there for 2 years. Gas has gone bad. They didn't do any maintenance on it. It's important that if you have generators or resources, part of preparedness isn't just having them; it's making sure they work when they're needed. We saw that in a few places, and also widespread boil water advisories. Have your templates ready to go, understand what's needed if you lose pressure and how you're going to disseminate that information. Like I said, high stress environment. Last thing you want is a ton of people giving you a call asking about their drinking water or what's needed. Have those media resources available and have a strategy to get those out to your customers. And then post-event resource reimbursement documentation. A lot of places didn't keep any documentation for anything that they requested. I know it's in the moment. We can help provide that afterwards if we have a record of it, if you put in resource requests properly. But this goes beyond ESF3. This is a general widespread kind of comment, is a lot of people struggled to have what they needed to get their reimbursements after the hurricane. So make sure you're documenting things as you go during an emergency event, and get copies of any kind of paperwork that you can. So here's my information. Like I said, during emergencies, you could call my number. You could email me. We have an ESF3 email box that you can send emails to, boil water advisories, anything of that nature. If you could also contact GRWA if you really need to, and they can take down the information and we could get those resource requests entered for you. You should also know who your local EMA is. Like I said, they could also get to us or call GMA directly. Everything will eventually filter down to ESF3, but it'd be easiest if you go straight to us so that we're not calling you back or you're wondering where your request is. So you could feel free to take down my information and give me a call if there's ever an emergency or you need any sort of resource in an emergency situation.
Thank you, Sean. I'm going to open up now for questions from the council members. Any of you want to ask anything of our speakers? Oh yeah, and you'll need to unmute yourself if you're asking a question.
This is Bruce Azevedo. I have a question for you.
Yeah, go ahead, Bruce.
Yeah, I'm the chairman of the Savannah RWP Water Council. And, for our planning guides and our renewals every 5 years, I don't believe we have really delved into adding to our plan disaster response. So if we assign a committee to that, we can get some assistance from your group or anybody that you suggest so that we can research on how this should be implemented into our plan.
Yeah, we'd like to support you with that, Bruce. And Sean, would you be the best person to support the councils in planning for disaster response?
So to be honest with you, GRWA does a lot of our emergency response plan guidance and things of that nature. I could connect you with Jay Matthews because he's probably setting more eyes on some kind of emergency response guidance than anybody in the state at this point when it comes to the water sector.
Okay, that's great. I just needed some names. I appreciate it.
Great. Thank you, Bruce. Other questions? Sean, in follow-up, I think we can send out your contact information to the council members so they have that to share with their local utilities and local governments. You had mentioned the EMA, the regional contacts, but it sounded like it was best to just get in touch with you directly. Is that right?
Yeah, if you go directly to us, we can make sure that we get everything in, and we won't have to have any follow-up phone calls. Usually when we get something put in by an EMA, it's not all the information that's needed, but it also acknowledge the fact that in certain situations, it might be easier for water systems to go through that local EMA. And the fact is they differ a lot from place to place. For one area, it could be an operator of a water system. For another area, it could be somebody at the fire station. For a county, they might actually have somebody that this is their only job and this is exactly what they do. So things vary. But if you want to kind of go straight to the source, you could give us a call and we'll get everything in as needed. It's eventually going to funnel to us anyways.
Thanks, Sean.
Mhm.
Bill, Sean made some recommendations to the councils, and I was just wondering if you had anything you would mention in terms of information sources that might be looking to you as they're trying to do disaster.
Sure. And I'll actually send you a link at the end of this. Actually, and I was going to tack on to what Sean had mentioned too. One good link though, that National Hurricane Center, they just came out with a real good complete report on on Helene and the impacts, kind of the evolution of it. But tacking on to what Sean had said earlier too, really kudos goes out to the National Hurricane Center and Weather Prediction Center for forecasting, the track and really the rainfall amounts, because the rainfall amounts were actually well forecasted up in the Carolinas, where the major historic catastrophic flooding occurred. We actually had that historic flooding in Atlanta too on the 48-hour period, but some of the amounts that they projected actually came to fruition. So it was really a good job by the Weather Prediction Center and the National Hurricane Center. One other thing I was going to mention too is that Hurricane Helene came in with such a high forward speed. It was moving 28 to 30 miles per hour when it made landfall. So the forward speed that it was moving really was going to make it difficult to make a turn back to the west. And if you remember, like Sean was saying, a lot of the initial forecasts on some of the spaghetti models were projecting more of a Macon, even closer to Atlanta, and a lot of people in Atlanta were really shaking, I'm sure too, because they remember Opal back in 1995. This could have easily been an Opal type impact as far as wind damage goes for Atlanta. That had major wind impacts too, all along western Georgia, Atlanta Metro, Macon, straight up, across western central North Georgia. But this hurricane, actually stayed to the east, but it did not spare areas, like I said, such as, Valdosta, Savannah, especially Augusta, on up to the Carolinas, Northeast Georgia, Raven County, up in there. So those areas really took the brunt of it, being on that eastern edge, closer to the center of circulation. In addition, a lot of tornadoes occurred with this one too. And I think I did mention that before, but I did not mention we had 3 tornadoes in Georgia. Actually, I had 2 of the fatalities in Wheeler County from an EF1 that hit a trailer park. And another thing, Sean realizes this, I'm sure too, but 28 fatalities total in Georgia. 26 of those were from wind. And like he mentioned, major wind event, for the state of Georgia. And then, interestingly, this always occurs with hurricanes too. I'm sure he knows about it, but we had 9 indirect deaths following the hurricane, medical issues, auto accidents, post-storm cleanup, that kind of thing. So that can lead to a lot of issues, when you have landfalling hurricanes just following the event. But 37 total if you include direct and indirect deaths.
Yeah, and I just thought about it when you were talking. There's something I left off that I hadn't experienced before. Was that there were a lot of systems having to get police to park by their generators and security. This impacted so many people and it took so long to get power back going. We literally had, I think there were 3 instances of people stealing generators from water systems and taking them to their homes to power their homes. And in some cases, they just hitched it right up and yanked it completely out and destroyed the whole panel. So panels were having to be redone. That's something that we hadn't seen before. But guarding those resources, when you have such a giant impacted area, there's people who are desperate and want those resources that you have and will do things to get them.
All right, any other questions from our council members?
Yeah, I have one more question. Sorry about this. This was really great, and it's really going to help us a lot. Do you happen to know, as your agency, or do we have to go to EPD for this? But with all the oxygen level problems and water quality and degradation to our rivers, is there any study going on right now to find out if we're in worse shape than we were before? I know that in the the Savannah Upper Gucci, where probably half the rivers are redlined, and in the ecosystems, is there any study going on right now that the councils might need to know about and follow, especially in our areas of wet areas?
Quality impacts of storms, of this particular storm, Bruce?
Well, I was concerned it's such a bad storm, and we have a lot of grants going on trying to keep track of water qualities and stuff. And then when you have rivers that are totally overflowed, and you have farmland that has cows on it, and so you got contaminants getting back into the river. So I didn't know where we're at prior to that and after. That was really what some of my concerns were, and I was trying to find out if anybody is researching any of that.
Let's open that up to our EPD folks and see if they know of anything specific.
Appreciate it. Thank you.
That is not something I would be aware of.
Very good question, Bruce.
Hey, this is Jennifer Welty. And I just wanted to respond that there is not a specific study that EPD has underway, but that there are various continuous water quality monitoring stations throughout the state, as well as our monitoring team returns to many fixed stations as well each year. So that's certainly something we could gather information on for the Savannah Upper Geechee region or any of the other regions who might have an interest in that. And then, of course, as we enter into our next cycle of plan updates, we would be revisiting and revising all the water quality assessment and modeling work that we do for the planning process. So if any of that data is indicating some kind of long-term trend that might be associated with the storm, I think we would see that. But in terms of this was certainly a strong storm, but we do periodically have hurricane events that come through and that do have those temporal kind of at the time of impacts to water quality in the state.
I appreciate that, Jennifer. I didn't see that you were there. I'd have just gone straight to you.
Oh, no worries, hey, Bruce.
Thank you, Bruce. Thanks, Jennifer. Okay, anybody else with questions for our speakers? All right, well, I just want to thank our speakers for sharing this information with us today. And then Bruce, I'm going to share with your council support person your questions and make sure you all get coordinated on that for a future meeting. But if there are others who would like to do the same, please let your council support lead know. And the last thing I will mention is that our next webinar will be on May 8th. Also a lunchtime webinar that we will keep to an hour between 12 and 1. And we are going to focus on population projections. So if you're a council member who's been around for a while, you know that those projections are important in how we make our forecasts of water and wastewater needs for the regions. This presentation will be primarily about state level trends, as well as the methods used in the forecasts that are used by the regional water councils. We'll get more into the actual projections themselves later this year and into early next year. But this will be introductory and some background on how those are developed so that you're able to bring good questions to the forecasters and we can have some back and forth. Are finalized for the next round of regional. So I hope you'll be able to join us on May 8th. We will send reminders by email and I hope this has been helpful to you. And we look forward to seeing you at the next webinar. Thank you.
Thanks.